Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi and Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Tonight begins the Hebrew month of Sivan. And on this day, the day before Rosh Chodesh Sivan, there is a tradition instituted by the holy, the Shlah HaKodesh. And we put it on the page, on the Facebook page. There's a prayer that you can read as when we are praying that we should have upright children, right? Upright, righteous children who we can transmit our values to them, that they will transmit those values to the next generation. Beautiful prayer. You'll find that on the Facebook page. And Sivan has Shavuos in it when we celebrate the giving of Torah, and my birthday. Not that that's so important, but all of that begins tonight. Let's light up the darkness. Okay, who's in the house on a Thursday? Bill in Mid-Missouri, Nancy, North Carolina, Ehud in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Ella's in the house, Chaim in Florida, Patrice in Utah, Paula in the Great Northwest. Did I say Melissa in Great Neck? Welcome, everybody. We got a double daf with some very colorful teachings on it. So let's get to it. Our dafs today are pages 97 and 98 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 8, which God willing will complete and open Mishna number 2. The Gemara relates, a certain man borrowed a pail from another, and it broke. And he came before Rav Papa for judgment. And Rav Papa said to him, bring witnesses that you did not deviate from its regular use, and you will be exempt from liability, as this is comparable to a case of a borrowed animal that died due to ordinary labor. So we just learned this yesterday. Somewhat surprising. That since we know that the borrower has the highest degree of liability with respect to that which he borrows, meaning that if it's stolen, he has to pay for it. If it's lost, he has to pay for it. If the animal is injured or it dies due to circumstances beyond his control, he has to pay. But if he's using the animal in the ordinary course of labor, what was expected to be done with it when he borrowed it, and it died nonetheless, then he is not liable, because presumably there was something wrong with the animal, and perhaps it was actually the owner of the animal that was negligent in its upkeep, before it was ever lent. And so if you use it in an ordinary way, and it breaks, right, or the animal is injured or dies, then the borrower is not liable. So the Gemara relates, a certain man borrowed a cat, and we are near the top of 97a. A certain man borrowed a cat from another to hunt and kill mice for him. This is awesome. The mice banded together against the cat and killed it. So Rav Ashi sat, it's not awesome for the cat, I apologize, but it's just a little unexpected. So Rav Ashi sat and raised a dilemma. In a case like this, what is the law? Is this comparable to a case where a borrowed animal died due to ordinary labor or not? And Rav Mordechai said to Rav Ashi that Avimi of Hagronia said this in the name of Rava. With regard to a man who was killed by women, there is a need for neither judgment, there is no need for either judgment or judge. It is obvious that they are liable. So what does this mean? It's not that, women banded together to kill some kind of dangerous man and then they're going to be blamed for it. It's actually a much more specialized case than that. What it means is that a male was borrowed to impregnate females. And we're really not talking about humans here. It's like you borrow a bull to impregnate some cows. And the borrower works the bull too hard in this respect, has him impregnate too many cows, and that was too much for the bull. So, of course, the borrower would be liable in that situation. And so the comparison is, if mice banded together and killed the cat, what kind of mice are we talking about? Was this an ordinary case of the cat was borrowed to hunt down some mice in a home? Or are you saying that you borrowed the cat and set him up against some kind of, genetically mutant mice, some kind of super mice, that maybe they weren't so large, but that they had been trained to band together and kill their attacker? Well, that would not be the ordinary case of borrowing for a cat to hunt down some mice. So those are the two sides of the argument, right? If it was an unexpected calamity and there was no reason to believe these mice were other than normal mice, and they happened to behave this way, okay, well, the borrower is not to blame because he just used the cat in a normal manner. This was an odd thing. Is it circumstances beyond his control? Sounds like it, but in terms of what he did, it was ordinary labor, and that's why he's not going to be liable. On the other hand, if it's not ordinary labor, if there was reason to believe that these mice are abnormal, or if we could slot that into circumstances beyond his control, then maybe he would be liable. But it seems that we're making the comparison, to the bull that was asked to impregnate too many females, and so the owner of the cows ends up being liable. Now, there are those who say that the incident actually occurred in a different way. The cat ate many mice and was harmed by doing so and died. So Rav Ashi sat and deliberated, and in a case like this, what is the law? Rav Mordecai said to Rav Ashi that Avimi of Hagronia said this with regard to a man who overindulged in sexual intercourse to the extent that women killed him by exhausting him. There is neither judgment nor judge, i.e. there is no redress, since it is his own fault. Right? The man overindulged. It's not that the bull was asked to impregnate too many females. It's that the bull went ahead and did that, right? So how can you blame the borrower? Rava says, with regard to one who wants to borrow something from another and be exempt from liability, let him say to the lender at the time of borrowing, pour me water, and he will thereby be exempt, as it is then a case of borrowing an item and borrowing or hiring the services of the owner. I mean, this is a real loophole, right? Taking advantage of the loophole, because as we've seen, when the borrower borrows the cow, the owner of the cow comes along with it and is somehow, serving the borrower, right? His services are either being borrowed or hired by the borrower. Then the borrower is exempt, will not be liable if something happens to the cow, right? Because it's like the owner came with the cow. Now you're going to say that if at the time of borrowing the animal, the owner of the animal serves a glass of water to the borrower, we're going to qualify for that exemption? Technically, yes. And so the Gemara also teaches how the lender should avoid being subject to such a technicality. And if the lender is perspicacious and wishes to prevent the borrower from being exempt from liability, let the lender say to the borrower, borrow the item first, and then I will pour you a glass of water. Since the owner will not yet be working for the borrower at the time of the borrowing, the exemption would not apply. Rava says, a teacher of children, the local gardener, the local butcher, and the local bloodletter, and a scribe of the city, with regard to all of them, if someone borrows an item from them at the time of their work, he is exempt from liability, as the case is comparable to borrowing an item and borrowing or hiring its owner with it, because these people are always considered to be in the employ of the residents of the place where they work. And the Gemara relates, the rabbi said to Rava, Master, you are lent to teach us Torah. And so if we were to borrow an item from you, we should be exempt from liability. These rabbis stated this based on Rava's own ruling. Rava was angered by this, and he said to them, "Do you want to take my money away from me? On the contrary, I am not lent to you. Rather, you are lent to me, since you assist me in consolidating my Torah knowledge. And this is the proof that it is you who are assisting me. Whereas I am able to deflect you from one tractate to another tractate because I am not obligated to teach specifically that which you want to learn, you are not able to deflect me from what I wish to teach." Right? And so since I decide what our agenda is going to be each day, you can say that the students are in the service of the teacher, which from a point of view of which way the respect should flow, actually makes more sense. And this idea, of easily triggered students in modern times who just can't wait to post a negative online review about a teacher, and an asinine university administration who would then, make its hiring and firing decisions based on a few triggered students in these reviews. I mean, thank God I haven't been subject to this. But, some of my friends in academia have definitely talked about and what a chilling effect that has on proper instruction. And one of the reasons why teaching has suffered in modern times at the higher levels of academia. Let's continue before I get on my soapbox. The Gemara comments, "But it is not so that a teacher is never lent to his students during the days of the Kala, which were the gatherings for Torah study during Elul and Adar in ancient times. The teacher is required to teach a specific subject, and therefore he is lent to them. During the rest of the days of the year, they are lent to him, as he can teach whatever subject matter he wishes." And the Gemara relates, Marimar bar Chanina rented out a mule to the residents of Bechozai. So he went out to raise up a load onto the mule together with those who rented it. Later, they were negligent with the animal, and it died. They came before Rava for judgment, and he deemed them liable to pay. They were negligent. The sages said to Rava, "But this is a case of a mishap that occurred due to a renter's negligence in safeguarding a deposit that was rented together with its owner." The owner was serving the renters at the time that the animal entered the possession of the renter. And the law is in such a case that the renter would be exempt, right? Because the owner came along with the animal at the time that they rented it. Rava was embarrassed that he had ruled incorrectly, but ultimately it was revealed that Marimar bar Chanina had gone out only to supervise the loading, but did not actually participate in loading the animal. Accordingly, Rava's ruling that the renters were liable proved to be correct. He wasn't there at the time that the animal was borrowed, only at the time of the loading. So the Gemara comments, this works out well according to the one who says that in a case of a mishap that occurred because of a borrower's negligence in safeguarding a deposit that was borrowed together with its owner, the borrower is exempt. For that reason, Rava was embarrassed for ruling incorrectly. But according to the one who says that in such a case the borrower is liable, why was he embarrassed? Wouldn't it appear that he ruled correctly? And so the Gemara amends the details of the incident. Those that rented the mule were not negligent with it. Rather, it was stolen from them. And then it died naturally in the house of the thief. And those who rented the mule came before Rava for judgment, and he deemed them liable. And the sages said to Rava, this is a case of theft of a deposit that was borrowed, together with borrowing the services of the owner, and so the borrower should be exempt. Rava was embarrassed that he ruled incorrectly, but ultimately it was revealed that Marimar bar Chanina had not gone out with the animal at the time that it was borrowed, only at the time that it was loaded, and so the exemption would not apply, and therefore the ruling of Rava was correct. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. Mishna 2. There is one who borrowed a cow, and he borrowed it for half of the day, and he rented it for the other half of the day. Or he borrowed it for today and he rented it for tomorrow. Or he rented one cow and he borrowed another one from the same person, right? So the two people have two simultaneous relationships. I am both, let's say I'm borrowing and I'm renting from you, right? So you are the owner of the animal, and the animal is going to come into my custody because I'm borrowing it. But there's a second animal that I am renting. Or there's only one animal, but we've agreed that I'm borrowing it for the first half of the day and I'm renting it for the second half of the day. Okay, so same two individuals are having two relationships. And in one of the first two cases, the cow died, and it is not clear during which period the cow died. Or in the last case, one of the cows died, and it is not clear whether it was the borrowed cow or the rented cow that died. So we have a suffix, we have a doubt, right? We don't know if the cow that died was borrowed from the owner or rented from the owner. There's two possibilities, but we're not sure which. So if the lender then says the one that died is the borrowed cow, because he wants to be paid back, or the lender says the cow that died on the day that it was being borrowed, not during the day it was being rented. Or the lender says it died during the period in which it was being borrowed, so that according to his claim, the borrower is liable to pay for the cow. Right? So according to the lender, the cow that died was a borrowed cow, either because it was during the period when it was borrowed as opposed to the period when it would be rented, or because there were two cows and it was the borrowed cow that died, not the rented cow. So that's the claim of the lender. And the other one, meaning the borrower, says, I don't know what happened. I don't know whether it was the borrowed cow or the rented cow. So in that situation, the borrower is liable to pay. He doesn't know. The lender, who knows his animals or knows the situation, has a claim. He says with certainty it was the borrowed cow. Okay, so then the borrower pays. Now, if the renter says the rented cow is the one that died, or it died on the day that it was being rented, or it died during the period during which it was being rented, right? So now the renter is confident that the cow that died is the rented cow, which means he's not going to be liable as he would be if it was a borrowed cow. And the other one, meaning the owner of the cow, says, yeah, I don't know what happened. So now we go with the one that has a claim of certainty, the renter, and he says it was a rented cow that died. The owner of the cow doesn't know, so the renter is exempt. He does not have to pay. If the owner says with certitude the borrowed cow is the one that died, and the renter says with certitude the rented cow is the one that died, and the renter takes an oath that it was the rented cow that died, then he is exempt from liability. But he had to take an oath, right? Most people are not too quick to take an oath if they're not sure. So this guy is sure, and that's why we're going to allow him to take the oath, and then he's exempt. But if this one says, I don't know what happened, and that one says, I don't know what happened, then they divide the disputed amount. The bailee is liable to pay for only half the value of the cow. That's the Mishnah, Mishnah number 2. Now the Gemara. Conclude from the Mishnah that in a comparable situation where one says to another, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the other one says, I do not know whether or not I have your money, that the defendant is liable to pay. And the Gemara suggests, let us say, that it is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Nachman, as it was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disagreed about the following case with regard to one who approaches another and says, I have 100 dinars in your possession, right? I lent you 100 dinars. You are holding 100 dinars of mine. And the other one says, I don't know if I'm holding 100 dinars of yours. Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda say the respondent is liable to pay because he did not deny the claim. Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan say he is exempt from payment. And the Gemara refutes this contention. Just as Rav Nachman says in that context, he is liable to pay only in a case where there is a matter of an oath between them. Here too, it is a case where there is a matter of an oath between them. So in that case, Rav Nachman rules that he is liable to pay only if he's already liable to take an oath concerning his denial of part of the claim. Right? An oath applies in certain situations. One of them is if I say, you owe me 100 dinars. You say, no, Sal, I owe you 50 dinars. You're admitting to a partial claim, right? So there you would be subject to an oath. You would say, I admit that I owe you 50. I deny that I owe you the other 50, either because I never borrowed it or because I already paid it back. You would swear an oath that that is the case, and then you're exempt from the part that you denied by oath. And you would pay me, you would still owe me the part that you admit. So that is one of the situations where an oath applies. So because an oath applies and we have this doubt on one side or the other or both or neither, then we can get into the outcome. But it's only because we're already in a situation where an oath applies because there was a partial admission to a claim. Right? In that case, Rav Nachman rules that he's liable to pay only if he's already liable to take an oath concerning his denial of part of the claim. Since he does not know if he owes this sum, and he is therefore unable to take the oath he is liable to take, he must pay. Right? If you say to me, Sal, I'm sure I already paid you back 50 dinars, I only owe you 50. Okay, well, that's why you swear an oath, because you know, according to the facts as you understand them, what your liability is, right? That it's for half the amount that I'm claiming. But if you just say, I don't know, then you can't swear an oath. Therefore, an oath doesn't apply. And since an oath doesn't apply, perhaps, according to one of the views, you're fully exempt. Maybe not. Let's keep reading. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of a matter of an oath, where an oath applies? So the Gemara explains, this is in accordance with the statement of Rava. Now we're on page 98a. As Rava says, one who approaches another and says, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the other one says, you have in my possession only 50 dinars that I am sure about, and as for the rest, I don't know. As one who admitted to part of a claim, he is liable by Torah law to take an oath that he does not owe the other 50 dinars. Since he cannot take an oath to that effect because he is unsure, he must pay the whole claim. Now, the Gemara explains how the Mishna can be interpreted as referring to a case in which the defendant makes a partial admission, thereby requiring him to take an oath. So you find it in the first clause, i.e., in the first two cases of our Mishnah, in a situation where he took hold of 2 cows, and in the latter clause, i.e., in the third case, in a situation where he took hold of 3 cows. And the Gemara explains. One can interpret the first clause to be referring to a case where one took hold of 2 cows, as follows. The case is that the owner said to the Bailey, I delivered 2 cows to you under the agreement that 1/2 of the day you would have them through a borrowing relationship, and the other half of the day through a renting relationship. Or alternatively, 1 day through borrowing and 1 day through renting. And I claim that both cows died during the period of borrowing, so you are liable to pay for both of them. And the borrower said to him, with regard to one of the cows, yes, I admit that it died during the period of borrowing, so I owe you the value of that cow. But with regard to the other cow, I do not know whether it died during a period of borrowing or if it died during a period of renting. Because he admits to part of the claim, he is required to take an oath in order to be exempt from the rest of the claim. But as he concedes that he does not know what happened, he is unable to take such an oath. And the law is that since he is unable to take an oath, he must pay for both cows. And one can interpret the latter clause to be referring to a case where he took hold of 3 cows. And it goes like this. The case is that the owner said to the Bailey, I gave 3 cows to you, 2 through borrowing and 1 through renting. And I claim that those two that were being borrowed were the ones that died. And the borrower said to him, yes, I admit that one of the cows that was borrowed died. But with regard to the other one that died, I do not know if it was the other borrowed cow or, and so that cow that is still alive is the one that was being rented, and so I owe you for 2 cows. Or if the one that was being rented is the one that died, and the other borrowed cow is still alive, and therefore I only would owe you for 1 cow that died, right? Because I don't owe you if it died. I owe you if it died while it was borrowed, but I don't owe you if it died while it was being rented. Because he admits to part of the claim, in order to be exempt from the rest of the claim, he would be required to take an oath, and he concedes that he does not know what happened, so then therefore he is unable to take such an oath, and the law is that since he is unable to take an oath, he must pay for both cows. The Gemara explains how the Mishnah can be interpreted, even according to the unique opinion of Rami Bar Chama. And the Mishnah can be interpreted in accordance with the opinion of Rami Bar Chama, who says, in order for any of the 4 types of bailees, unpaid bailee, paid bailee, renter, or borrower, to be required to take an oath, they need to make both a denial of a partial claim, right? Partial denial. In other words, there were 2 animals. He says, I admit that I owe you for one of them, but I don't admit to the other. So that would be the partial admission. He would need, says Rami Bar Chama, he would need to make both a denial of part of the claim and an admission to another part of the claim. So according to Rami Bar Chama, he needs to be certain. There's no I don't know. I admit that you lent me 2 cows. I admit that one of them died while it was in a state of being borrowed, and I owe you, and I deny that the other one was being borrowed. I know that that one was rented when it died, and I don't owe you for that. So according to this opinion, you find the bailee is liable to take an oath in the first clause, i.e. in the first 2 cases of our Mishnah, in a situation where he took hold of 3 cows, and in the latter clause in the third case, in a situation where he took hold of 4 cows, and the Gemara explains, when would he be liable? One can interpret the first clause to be referring to a case where he took hold of 3 cows. And it was like this. The lender would say, I gave 3 cows to you under the agreement that 1/2 of the day you would have them through borrowing and the other half of the day through renting. Or alternatively, 1 day through borrowing and 1 day through renting. And I claim that all 3 of them died during a period of borrowing, and so you are liable to pay for all of them. And the borrower answered him, with regard to one of the cows, this never happened, as I only took 2 cows from you. And as for the 2 cows that I did take, with regard to one of them, yes, I admit it died during a period of borrowing. But with regard to the other one, I do not know whether it died during a period of borrowing or if it died during a period of renting. Because the bailee admits to part of the claim and denies another part of the claim, very interesting. He knows that he can deny one part, he knows that he can admit to another part, and yet there's a third part that he's unsure about. But because he has certainty of a denial, certainty of an admission, and then there's an additional doubt, that's why, according to Rami Bar Chama, we have this situation of swearing to an oath, and yet there is still doubt. So then what happens? Because the bailee admits to part of the claim and denies another part of the claim, he is required to take an oath in order to be exempt from the rest of the claim. But since he concedes that he does not know what happened for the third part of the claim, he is unable to take such an oath. And the law is that since he is unable to take such an oath, he must pay for all 3 cows. That's unexpected. He's sure that he only borrowed 2 cows. He's sure that one of them was a borrowed cow that he admits to. There's this doubt about the 3rd cow, and because he can't swear an oath about that, since he's unsure, he ends up having to pay for all 3 cows. Now, one can interpret the latter clause of our Mishnah to be referring to a case where he took hold of 4 cows as follows. Again, we're getting into very strange and bizarre examples, as so often happens in the Talmud, because what the sages are really doing is using a hypothetical to test our understanding of the limits of the law. So, the case would be that the owner said to the bailee, I gave you 4 cows. 3 through borrowing, and 1 through renting. And I claim that those 3 that were being borrowed were the ones that died. And the borrower said to him, with regard to one of those cows that you claim, the matter never occurred. I didn't borrow 4 cows from you, I borrowed 3 cows. And as for the cows that I did take that died, with regard to one of them, yes, I admit that it was the cow that was being borrowed that died. But the other cow that died, I do not know whether it was the cow that was being rented that died, and so that is still alive, and the one that was being borrowed, and the one that is still alive was the borrowed cow, or whether the cow that was being borrowed died, and so the living cow is the one that was rented. Because the Bailee admits to part of the claim, denies another part of the claim, he's required to take an oath in order to be exempt from the rest of the claim, as he concedes that he does not know what happened, he is unable to take such an oath, and the law is that since he is unable to take such an oath, he must pay for all 3 cows. And now we're on page 98b. The Mishnah teaches, the Bailee rented 1 cow and borrowed another one. So this owner says with certitude, the borrowed cow is the one that died. And that renter says with certitude, the rented cow is the one that died. In this case, the renter takes an oath that the rented cow is the one that died, and then he is exempt. And the Gemara asks, but why should he take an oath? That which the owner claimed from him, he did not admit to at all. There was no partial admission. Right? That which the owner claimed from him, he did not admit to at all. And that which the Bailee admitted to, the owner had not claimed from him. In order to be required to take an oath, the Bailee must admit to part of the owner's actual claim. So why would this be a situation where he takes an oath? And Ula said the Mishnah is referring to a case where the owner required the Bailee to take another oath by extending the oath that he had already required him to take. This is fascinating. If a plaintiff can get a defendant to swear an oath, right? So one of these other weird cases, right, with the 3 cows, where the defendant admits to part of the claim and denies part of the claim and is unsure. Not such a weird case. We have 2 things going on, right? You and me have 2 relationships going on. With respect to cows, right, I lented you a cow and I rented to you a cow, right? And then one of them died and we're not sure which is which. And I'm claiming it was the borrowed cow that died and you are claiming it was the rented cow that died. There's no oath for you to swear. But it turns out that I also lent you a mouse. I also lent you 2 cats. Right? Would that work? I lent you 2 cats. And you say, and then one of them died, right? And I lent both of them to you, and you say one of them died, and you say, Sal, you lent me a cat, I admit to that, but you did not lend me 2 cats. You only lent me 1 cat. And so you would have to swear an oath that I only lent you 1 cat, and then you would be excused from liability for that second cat. But now that I'm getting you to swear an oath about the cats, I can also do the oath of extension and make you swear an oath about the cows. Because if I've got you in court and you're swearing an oath before the Beis Din, before the rabbinic court, then while we're there, I can make you swear an oath in a situation where ordinarily I would not be able to. We've seen that law before. The oath of extension. And the Gemara elaborates. For example, this is a case where the owner said to him, take an oath to me in any event that the cow died naturally and not as a result of your negligence. The owner has a right to demand such an oath. And since the Bailee is made to take an oath that the cow died naturally, that oath can be extended such that he can be also made to take an oath that the cow was rented when it died. And the Mishnah concludes, if this one says, I do not know what happened, and that one says, I do not know what happened, then they divide the disputed amount, and the Bailee is liable to pay for only half the value of the cow. And the Gemara asks, well, sounds kind of logical, but in accordance with whose opinion is this? And it is in accordance with the opinion of Sumakos, who says when there is property of uncertain ownership, the parties divide it equally between them because no one is sure what's going on. Rabbi Abba Bar Memel raises a dilemma. If one borrowed a cow with borrowing the services of its owner, right? So the owner's coming along with it, that would seem to indicate that if it died due to theft, loss, or injury, if there was theft, loss, or death or injury due to unavoidable accident, the borrower who would normally be liable is not liable because the owner came along with the animal. That's what we're talking about again. If one borrowed a cow together with borrowing the services of its owner, and then, before returning the cow, he rented the cow from the owner without borrowing the services of its owner, then what is the law? We already had a borrowing relationship, but before I returned it, we entered into a renting relationship. The owner came along with the cow at the outset for the borrowing relationship, but the owner was not present when we decided it would become a renting relationship. Does it work? Then, what is the liability then? So do we say the borrowing stands by itself and the renting stands by itself? They are two independent transactions, and so the Bailey is liable for any mishap that occurs during the renting period, as the owner's services were not borrowed by him during that time. Or perhaps the subsequent renting is related to the prior borrowing and is considered an extension of it. It could be said that the renting is related to the borrowing because a renter is liable for theft and loss, as is a borrower. Perhaps the liability resulting from renting that immediately follows a period of borrowing is a downgraded form of the liability undertaken at the start of the period of borrowing. So if so, then in this case, since the Bailey bore no liability during the borrowing period, as the cow was borrowed while the owner was providing his services to the borrower, the Bailey will not bear liability during the rental period. And if you say that in such a case, the subsequent renting is related to the prior borrowing and is an extension of it, then in the reverse case, where one rented a cow together with borrowing the services of its owner, and then before the cow was returned, he borrowed it from the owner without borrowing the services of its owner, then what is the law? Would it be the same? Do we say that the subsequent borrowing is certainly not related to or an extension of the prior renting, as a borrower undertakes a higher level of liability than a renter? Or perhaps, since the subsequent borrowing is partially related to the prior renting, as the borrower is liable for theft for theft and loss, just as a renter is, it is considered as though it were related entirely to it and is an extension of it. And consequently, the exemption of using an item together with its owner's services also applies during the subsequent borrowing that immediately follows the rental period. And if you say, in such a case, we do not say that since the subsequent borrowing is partially related to the prior renting, that it is considered as though it were entirely related to it and is an extension of it, then in a case where one borrowed a cow together with borrowing the services of its owner, and then before returning the cow, he rented it from the owner without borrowing the services of its owner, and then at the end of the renting period, he again borrowed it without the owner's services, then what is the law? I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. Today we're two short pages in a row, huh? So do we say that the second period of borrowing returns to its original place, i.e., is the third period in which one borrowed the cow essentially a continuation of the first period? Or perhaps the period of renting serves as an interruption in the middle of the two periods of borrowing, such that the third period cannot be seen as a continuation of the first period. And similarly, in another case, one rented a cow together with borrowing the services of its owner, and then, before returning the cow, he borrowed it from the owner without borrowing the services of its owner. And then at the end of the borrowing period, he again rented it without borrowing the services of the owner. What is the law? Do we say that the second period of renting returns to its original place? Or is the second period essentially a continuation of the first period? Or perhaps the period of borrowing serves as an interruption in the middle of the two periods of renting, such that the third period cannot be seen as a continuation of the first period? And the Gemara concludes that these dilemmas shall stand. Teku, the answer was never brought, so we don't know from that discussion. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. And we'll pick it up, God willing, tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, with Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 8. I find it very interesting, perhaps on a spiritual level, that the Gemara so often raises dilemmas that it does not answer. I mean, what's really going on there? Was it just that one smart aleck in the Beis Midrash, right, in the study hall, raised a smarty pants question, and no one was able to solve it, and they said, well, good job, let's write that down and include it in the Gemara? I would say no. I would say the dilemma was raised and people really thought about it, argued about it, disputed it, researched it, spent a lot of time on it, and could not solve it. They couldn't solve it because they didn't have the tools. They simply don't have the law available. It's like God left that dispute unanswerable because the combination of the written Torah, the oral Torah, the tradition of the sages does not reveal an answer to that question. And sometimes they even tell us that these questions shall stand unresolved until Elijah comes and tells us what the response would be. But was time wasted seeking an answer to these unanswerable questions? Obviously not. That's why they're recorded here, right? And I think it's an important thing for us to remember that not every question can be answered. Not every goal can be met. Not every mountain can be climbed. And making the attempt is beautiful and something that we learn and grow from nonetheless. Okay. On our double daf, 97 and 98, just a couple of questions from Joe. Would think that there would be a way to put something on the cow that could not be removed, or a cut on the ear to mark the difference between them. Of course there was. Of course they could have done that. But how often does it happen that people, when they enter into a contractual relationship, did not anticipate the ways in which it could go wrong, and they didn't, right? They didn't include the condition or the codicil, or, what we would do if such and such happened, or they didn't, take preventive measures to make sure that in the event something went wrong, it would be clear to both parties what would happen. And then they come and litigate before the Beis Din, the rabbinic court, and the Beis Din has to apply the law as they understand it in the absence of these contractual agreements that don't exist because the parties never anticipated this could happen. It happens all the time. Joe, some people cut off a bit of the tuft of hair on the end of the tail to mark the cows. Of course they should have done that. It would have been much better if they did that. But they didn't think that it would be necessary, and now we're left, with the situation as is. And Bill says, yeah, none of the Taiku questions seem arbitrary. They all seem like issues that people would find very frustrating to have no answer to. But as you say, not every answer can be answered in this life. And very good parenthetical there, Bill. That's what I've got for us today, and look forward to learning with you, God willing, tomorrow, Friday.